You know, I've spent most of my life out here. Not visiting out here, but living it. I mean deep, where the cell signal dies about 3 counties back and the only sound is the wind arguing with the pines. We're talking about the high country of Montana, the kind of place where winter doesn't just visit. It moves in, kicks its boots off, and refuses to leave until May. My name is Jake, and I'm telling you this story because it changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. And trust me, I thought I knew a lot. This happened late November. The air was already sharp enough to slice glass, and the first serious snow had dusted the peaks, making everything look clean and deceptively beautiful. I was about 12 miles beyond the nearest logging road, the kind of distance you cover on a snowmobile, then ditch the machine and switch to snowshoes. I was checking on a few remote trapping lines I run, mostly for marten and lynx. It's hard, lonely work, but it's honest, and it keeps me supplied through the long winter. I'd been out 3 days already, sleeping rough in a lean-to I'd built years ago. The third morning, I strapped on my pack, heavy with supplies and a few successful pelts, and started my trek back toward where I'd stashed the sled. The sun hadn't quite cleared the eastern ridge yet, so the forest floor was a mosaic of deep blue shadows and blinding white snow. Every step was a crunch, a rhythmic sound that usually feels comforting, the sound of a man moving through his own territory. It was about 2 hours into the hike when I was crossing a frozen creek bed that I first saw him. Now I see wildlife all the time: deer, elk, bears, though they should have been denned up by now, and plenty of wolves. They're usually skittish. You catch a glimpse, a flash of gray against the trees, and then they're gone. They want nothing to do with you. But this one wasn't skittish. He was sitting maybe 50 yards back, right on the edge of the timberline, looking at me. He was huge. I mean, truly massive. Not just tall, but thick through the chest, with a coat the color of smoked charcoal and eyes that seemed to catch the weak morning light and hold it. He wasn't panting. He wasn't aggressive. He was just observing. I stopped, pulled my rifle off my shoulder, not because I intended to shoot, but out of reflex. It's what you do when you're that far out. "All right, buddy," I muttered, keeping my voice low. "Go on now." The wolf didn't move, didn't twitch an ear. I held still for a long minute, waiting for him to break the stare. When he didn't, I let out a sharp, loud clap with my gloved hands. That usually sends them running. He just dipped his head slightly, like he was nodding. Then he stood up, leisurely, stretched his powerful legs, and took maybe 2 steps back into the shadows. Okay, he's just curious, I thought. He's probably never seen a man this deep before. I shrugged it off, shouldered the rifle, and started walking again. My initial route was straightforward, a long, gentle descent through a stand of old-growth spruce heading toward the main valley floor. I walked for another half hour, the crunch of my snowshoes the only sound. I felt the hair prickle on the back of my neck. That feeling. You know it, right? The one where you know you're being watched, even if you can't see the watcher. I stopped again, slowly, turning my body just enough to look behind me without making a big show of it. And there he was. Not 50 yards this time. Maybe 30. He had followed my exact trail, stepping neatly into the indentations left by my snowshoes. He wasn't hiding behind a bush or a rock. He was standing right out in the open, massive and still. This time, the curiosity turned into a knot of cold dread in my gut. "What are you doing?" I said, louder this time. I threw a small chunk of frozen firewood I'd been carrying for kindling toward him. It landed 10 feet short with a dull thump. He barely blinked. He wasn't snarling. He wasn't showing his teeth. He looked patient, like a dog waiting for its owner to finish a conversation. And that was the weirdest part. Wolves are predators. They operate with intensity or caution. This one was operating with unnerving calm. I picked up my pace. I started moving fast, pumping my arms, trying to put distance between us. I was moving downhill, which helped, but the heavy pack made it grueling. I crossed a small ridge and dropped into a hollow, figuring the terrain would block his view and break his concentration. I didn't look back for a full 15 minutes. I just pushed. My lungs were burning and the sweat was chilling on my neck, but I kept going until I reached the next landmark, a massive, lightning-scarred juniper that I always used as a navigational marker. I paused, leaning against the tree, trying to catch my breath. I took a swig of water and forced myself to look back up, the slope. My blood turned to ice. He was standing right where the trail broke into the hollow, looking down at me. He hadn't taken a shortcut. He had just matched my speed perfectly. You have to understand the distance we were covering. We were talking miles now. 3, maybe 4 miles since the first sighting. A wolf following a man for a short distance out of territorial defense is normal. A wolf following a man for miles, right on his trail, in broad daylight without making any aggressive moves, is something else entirely. It felt deliberate. It felt like an escort, or maybe a shadow. I tried shouting again, a primal yell designed to sound big and dangerous. "Get out of here! Go!" He simply sat down. Not defensively, but comfortably, like he was settling in for the long haul. That's when the fear shifted from, "I might be attacked," to, "What does he want?" Because if he wanted to attack, he would have done it already. I was burdened, slowed by the snowshoes, and clearly exhausted. He could have flanked me easily in the dense timber. The wolf was choosing to stay visible. He was choosing to follow my exact path. I decided I couldn't waste energy trying to scare him off anymore. My goal was the snowmobile cache, which was still about 8 miles away. If I could reach the machine, I could outrun him. I started walking, again, but this time I changed tactics. I began moving off trail, cutting sharp angles through the deeper snow, hoping to lose him in the underbrush. This made the going infinitely harder. Every step was a struggle, kicking up clouds of powder. I checked back every few minutes. He was still there. He didn't seem to be struggling with the deep snow at all. His long legs and massive paws powered through the drifts, keeping the precise distance, 30 to 40 yards, between us. He moved with an economy of motion that was humbling and terrifying. By noon, I was completely soaked in sweat, chilled from the inside out, and utterly demoralized. I stopped by a small stream that was still partially flowing and dropped my pack. I needed fuel. I pulled out a thermos of coffee and a sandwich, trying to act casual, trying to show him I wasn't running scared, even though my heart was pounding against my ribs like a hammer. He stopped, too. He stood patiently on the opposite bank of the stream, watching me eat. He didn't try to sneak closer. He didn't whine or pace. I finished my sandwich, took a long drink of coffee, and then, as an experiment, I tossed the crust of the bread toward him. I figured maybe he was just desperately hungry. The crust landed at his feet. He sniffed it, then looked back up at me. He didn't touch it. This confirmed it. He wasn't following me for food. This was personal. Or, at least, it was intentional. I stood up, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. We had covered at least 6 miles together now. 6 miles where this huge, imposing animal had tracked my every move, silent and relentless. I packed up my gear and started walking again, but the rhythm of the hike was ruined. It wasn't just me in the mountains anymore. It was me, the mountains, and the charcoal-colored shadow pacing 30 yards behind me. The sun began its rapid descent toward the western horizon, and the light started turning that dangerous, beautiful shade of orange that means the temperature is about to plummet. I knew I had maybe an hour, maybe less, before the forest became pitch black. I pushed myself harder, desperation giving me a false burst of energy. Steep incline that led up to the plateau where I'd left the snowmobile. It was the hardest part of the day, and I needed every ounce of strength. As I struggled up the slope, kicking my snowshoes into the icy crust, I slipped. Not a major fall, but enough to twist my ankle painfully. I cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound and leaned heavily against a boulder, waiting for the throbbing pain to his behavior. For the first time in 6 miles, he moved quickly. He didn't run at me, but he closed the distance from 30 yards to 10 yards in a few powerful bounds. I instinctively raised the rifle, pointing it loosely in his direction. My adrenaline surged. This was it, the moment of confrontation. He stopped 10 feet away. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He just stood there, masked right into my eyes. And then he let out the softest, strangest sound I've ever heard a wolf make. It wasn't a howl. It was a low, mournful whimper, a sound of distress. I stood frozen, the rifle trembling slightly in my hands, trying to decipher what was happening. We were 10 feet apart. I could see the condensation rising from his breath in the cold air. He took one careful step closer, had to climb. Then he looked back at me, lowered his head, and nudged his nose toward my pack, which lay half buried in the snow where it had fallen when I slipped. It was the look on his face that stopped me from shooting. It wasn't the look of a threat. It was the look of urgency. He was trying to tell me something. He was trying to communicate. And as the last blew dusk, I realized that this wolf hadn't been following me. He had been leading me. Or maybe he had been guarding me. But guarding me from what? Or guarding what? I gripped my rifle tighter, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the chilling air. I had to get to the snowmobile. I had to get out of the dark. And now my companion, my uninvited, silent 6-mile shadow, was waiting, leaned down, ignoring the sharp pain in my ankle, and retrieved my pack. When I looked up, the wolf was already moving, not up the trail, but slightly off to the side, maintaining that 10-foot buffer. He kept turning his head back to ensure I was following. I swallowed hard. Everything in my training, everything my father taught me about the wilderness, screamed at me to put a bullet in that instinct, whispered, "Trust the shadow." I took a painful step forward, following the massive gray shape deeper into the rapidly darkening forest, knowing that if this was a trap, I was walking right into it. The long miles had melted away my logic, leaving only confusion and a desperate need to find out why this wolf had chosen me. We continued up the steep incline, the wolf setting a measure. He knew this terrain intimately. We were moving faster now, despite my injury, propelled by the sheer bizarre nature of the situation. Every crunch of snow under my shoes felt deafeningly loud in the silence. I kept waiting for the aggressive move, the ambush, the snap of jaws. But all I got was the soft, rhythmic patting of his paws ahead of me, guiding me toward the unknown creature that should have been my enemy. And I had the terrifying feeling that the true reason for his companionship was only just beginning to reveal itself. We had miles to go, and the night was closing in fast. I swallowed hard. Everything in my training, everything my father taught me about the wilderness, screamed at me to put a bullet in that animal and run. But something deeper, some primal instinct, painful step forward, following the massive gray shape deeper into the rapidly darkening forest, knowing that if this was a trap, I was walking right into it. The long miles had melted away my logic, leaving only confusion and a desperate need to find out why this wolf had chosen me. We continued up the steep incline, the wolf setting a measured, steady pace, constantly checking back, faster now, despite my injury, propelled by the sheer bizarre nature of the situation. Every crunch of snow under my shoes felt deafeningly loud in the silence. I kept waiting for the aggressive move, the ambush, the snap of jaws, but all I got was the soft, rhythmic patting of his paws ahead of me, guiding me toward the unknown. I was 7 miles from safety, alone in the mountains, had the terrifying feeling that the true reason for his companionship was only just beginning to reveal itself. We had miles to go, and the night was closing in fast. That twilight hour, when the world turns from orange to purple to absolute black, is the most dangerous time in the high country. The temperature drops like a stone, and the shadows play tricks on your eyes. with my ankle knee with every misstep. I was a liability. Without the wolf, I would have stopped, dug a hasty snow shelter, and risked hypothermia just to rest the injury. But the wolf wouldn't let me stop. He kept that consistent pace 10 feet ahead, just a charcoal smudge against the white snow. If I lagged, he'd slow down, turning his head slightly and let out that low, impatient puff of breath. Not a threat. I had to rely entirely on the sound of his movement and the faint visual tracking. My headlamp was buried deep in my pack, and I knew if I stopped to dig it out, I'd lose momentum and maybe spook the wolf into running. Or worse, into thinking I was easy prey again. We climbed for what felt like an eternity. The grade was relentless. I was breathing in ragged, painful gasps. The pain in my that consumed my focus. At one point, I stumbled hard, catching myself just before I fell. My snowshoe tangled in a low-lying root buried under the crust. I let out a grunt of pain. The wolf stopped instantly. He turned and came back 3 steps. He looked directly at my injured leg, which I was favoring heavily. He didn't approach closer than 5 feet, but he was cloaked in gloom. He lowered his head again and nudged the snow right beside the root that had tripped me. It was like he was pointing it out. "Watch where you step." I stared at him, bewildered. Are you serious right now?" I whispered. He didn't react to my voice, only to my lack of movement. When I took a careful step past the root, he turned and resumed his lead. That moment, observation. This animal was demonstrating an awareness, an intent, that defied everything I knew about wild predators. He was actively mitigating the hazards of the trail for me. We kept moving, and the terrain started changing. The dense spruce gave way to a more open area, a high, windswept meadow that meant we were close to the plateau. The wind here was brutal, whipping the fresh left, leaving the obvious upward path. "Hey, no, the trail is straight," I called out, shivering. The snowmobile cache was straight ahead, maybe 2 miles now. He ignored my verbal protest. He simply continued his new, sharp trajectory, moving quickly along a narrow, rocky ledge that I would never have attempted in the dark, especially injured. I hesitated. This felt dangerous scramble, but the wolf stopped, planted all 4 massive paws firmly on the ledge, and looked back at me. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it was absolutely demanding. "Follow me now." Exhaustion won over fear. I gritted my teeth, carefully navigated the first few icy rocks, and followed him onto the ledge. The footing was treacherous, and I had to use my hands like this for maybe 5 minutes, skirting the edge of a steep drop-off. I could hear the wind howling down in the unseen valley below. It was terrifying, but the wolf moved with absolute confidence, placing his paws with a precision that told me he'd walked this line 100 times. Then, just as suddenly as he started, he stopped. We were standing in front of a massive granite outcrop. Tucked beneath a huge overhang, shielded entirely from the wind, was a shallow, dry-looking cave. More of a deep alcove, really. It was just big enough for a man to sit or lie down comfortably. The wolf stepped inside the alcove, turned around, and looked at me. Then he settled down on his haunches, blocking about half the entrance. I stood outside, panting, staring at the cave, then at the cracked from the cold. "The sled is up there. We're close." He didn't move. He just looked at me, then down at my swollen ankle, then back at the dark night outside. It hit me then, with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't guiding me to the snowmobile. He was guiding me to shelter. The wolf knew I couldn't make the last 2 miles, the most exposed and difficult miles. He had been pushing me hard, but only to get me to a safe, defensible spot where I could survive the night. He was forcing me to stop. The realization was staggering. This predator had prioritized my immediate need for shelter over my goal of escape. I slowly unbuckled my heavy pack and let it slide off my back onto the snowy ground just outside the alcove. I was shaking violently now. Hart took the rifle off my shoulder and held it loosely across my chest. I then carefully stepped into the rock shelter, moving to the back wall. keeping as much distance as I could from the enormous animal that was now sharing my space. The wolf didn't flinch. He just watched me settle. I pulled off my outer glove and touched my ankle. It was visibly swelling, hot and angry beneath the skin. Thermal blanket, the silver emergency kind, and wrapped my foot and lower leg tightly. The silence in the cave was thick, broken only by the wind howling harmlessly outside. I sat there, huddled against the cold rock, facing the wolf. He was still sitting, guarding the entrance facing outward toward the dark forest. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking out. This was the part feet from a massive wild wolf in a tiny cave, but I felt a weird sort of peace. He had led me here. He hadn't tried to kill me. He hadn't even tried to steal my pack or my gear. I pulled my water bottle out. It was already starting to freeze around the edges. I needed fire. I looked at the wolf. "Listen, buddy," I said softly, testing the waters. "I'm going to make a small fire. Just a little one, an ear." He was completely focused on the blackness outside. I carefully pulled out my small bag of tinder and the lighter. I had a few small dry pieces of birch bark and spruce needles. I cleared a tiny patch of rock near the back wall, away from the entrance, and started a fire. It was a small, fragile flame, but instantly the warmth felt like salvation. The light flickered across the cave walls. Him, clearly in the firelight, was almost as shocking as the first sighting. He was even bigger than I thought. His shoulders were immense. He looked like something out of a myth. And yet, he was still just sitting there, completely non-reactive to the fire, which should have made any wild animal nervous. I drank some water, ate a handful of dried jerky, and tried to think. 7 miles, then he forced me into shelter. Why? I kept running possibilities through my mind. Maybe he was a rogue dog, a hybrid? No, his size, his bearing, his eyes. He was pure wolf, a prime alpha male. Maybe he was sick or injured. I watched him closely in the firelight. His coat was thick and healthy. His movements were fluid and powerful. No limp, no obvious wounds. Maybe I had something he wanted, something hadn't bathed in 3 days, but that was normal. My gear was standard trapping gear. The only things that were different were the pelts in my pack, marten and lynx, but those scents weren't unusual. Then I remembered the whimper, that sound of distress when I fell. It wasn't about me. It was about what happened to me. I decided to try another experiment. I spoke to him again, Hound Blue. "Look, I appreciate the help," I murmured, rubbing my stiff hands together near the flame. "You saved me from twisting this ankle worse, maybe breaking it. But why? What's your angle? Are you waiting for me to fall asleep?" The wolf shifted slightly, but still didn't look at me. He raised his head, sniffing the air deeply. His nostrils flared, and I watched his muscles tense. Fire he was reacting to. It was something outside. My heart immediately started hammering again. The wolf wasn't just resting. He was on high alert. I grabbed my rifle, checking the action silently. The wolf let out another sound. Not a whimper this time, and not a full howl, but a deep, guttural rumble, vibrating in his chest. It was a warning. I strained my ears against the wind. Over the wind, I heard it too. Another sound, a very distinct sound that didn't belong in the wind and the snow. It was the sound of something heavy dragging across the icy crust, interspersed with the heavy, rhythmic thump, thump of something very large walking. And it was getting closer. The wolf stood up fully now, his massive body completely blocking the entrance of the small alcove. Whatever it was, he was ready to fight it. And suddenly, I knew why he had rushed me to this specific, defensible spot. He hadn't been guiding me away from the cold or the dark. He had been guiding me away from this. I didn't need to ask who the intruder was. In this terrain, at this time of year, there was only one animal heavy enough to make that dragging, thumping sound. Sleeping. A grizzly bear. A very large one, probably male, definitely roused early from his den and probably dangerously hungry and irritable. I looked at the wolf's back, then at my rifle. This wolf, my silent, bizarre companion, wasn't my enemy. He was my first line of defense against the true danger of the night. The sound of the bear was much closer now, maybe 50 yards away, moving straight toward the scent of the fire, the jerky, and most likely the scent of the wolf itself. I realized the horrifying truth of the wolf's actions. By leading me here, he had saved me from being caught out in the open, injured, but he had also trapped himself. If we were discovered, the small alcove would become a kill zone. I pulled the bolt back on the rifle and chambered around. The metal didn't flinch at the noise. Instead, he took a deep, silent breath, and then he let out a low, challenging growl directed into the darkness. It was a sound of pure territorial warning, a sound that said, "This is my space. Go away." The thumping footsteps outside stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, cold, and absolute. The bear was listening. He knew we were rifle leveled over the wolf's back. I knew I couldn't shoot the bear without risking hitting the wolf, and at this range a rifle shot might just wound and infuriate the massive creature. The wolf held his ground, a silhouette of defiance against the entrance. Then, from the darkness came a deep, rumbling inhalation, the bear testing the air again. And then a sound that made my uff, followed by the distinct sound of claws scraping granite just outside the entrance. The bear was right there. The wolf didn't move an inch. He was the picture of lethal calm. I whispered to the wolf's broad back, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "Okay, buddy, let's see if this works." If I was going to fight a bear, I needed to make noise and look big, but the wolf was for the massive head to appear in the entrance. The wolf then did the most unexpected thing yet. He didn't launch himself out. He didn't retreat. He shifted his weight, and with a surprising lack of aggression, he reached out his muzzle and gently nudged the thick hide of my backpack, which was lying just outside the entrance. He pushed it forward slightly toward the narrow oak, confused for a moment. What did I have that would scare a grizzly? Then I remembered the one thing I carried that was designed specifically for this scenario: the air horn, a small pressurized can used to signal or startle large animals. It was strapped to the side of the pack. I leaned forward, trying not to disturb the wolf, and quickly fumbled for the horn. My heart was pounding around the plastic can. The wolf let out a sudden, explosive bark. A sharp, warning sound meant to draw attention. The bear responded instantly. A massive, dark shape lunged into the opening, not fully entering the cave, but filling the space with its immense size and the smell of wet earth and pine. I saw a flash of huge teeth and a thick, shaggy shoulder. Before the bear could of the dark mass and pressed the button. The sound that erupted was a violent, high-pitched shriek that echoed off the granite walls, amplified 10 times inside the small alcove. It was the loudest, most piercing noise I've ever made in the woods. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The bear recoiled with a roar that sounded more like pure confusion and pain than aggression, for purchase on the rock. The wolf didn't wait. He launched himself out of the opening in a low, gray streak, not toward the bear, but flanking it, moving into the darkness to press the advantage. I heard a flurry of guttural snarls and the sickening sound of snapping teeth, followed by the heavy, desperate crashing of the bear running away down the slope. Clearly, the sounds faded quickly into the wind. I sat there, trembling, the air horn still clutched in my hand, staring at the empty entrance where seconds before, a grizzly bear had been trying to tear us apart. The wolf reappeared almost immediately. He didn't come running back triumphantly. He walked back slowly, deliberately, and stood in the entrance again, breathing heavily. Survival. He knew the bear was coming, and he had maneuvered me into the only position where we stood a chance. He had even directed me to the exact tool I needed for defense. I slowly lowered the rifle. You saved my life," I whispered, the words sounding weak and meaningless against the enormity of what had just happened. The wolf didn't acknowledge the praise. again facing the entrance, but this time he was closer to me, close enough that I could feel the residual heat radiating off his massive body. He laid his head down on his paws, but his eyes were wide open, staring into the dark. I knew then that the wolf wasn't just a guide or a guard. He was a partner, and he was waiting for the bear to give up and move on. The very creature I had been trying to escape for 7 terrifying miles. I had survived the first confrontation, but I still had no idea why this animal had chosen to become my guardian angel. I leaned back, resting my injured ankle, and watched the wolf's powerful, silent form. I had to wait for morning, and when morning came, I knew I wouldn't be leaving this place alone. We had a bond now, for Wolf still had something important to show me, something that was the real reason for this entire bizarre journey. The 7 miles had been the prologue. The night was the test, and the morning would hold the answer. The air horn blast had saved our lives, but it also told every creature for a mile that something interesting was happening here. I sat there, shaking, dark, a solid wall of muscle and fur. The fire, small as it was, cast dancing light that made his eyes shine like polished amber when they occasionally flickered toward the flames. I knew I couldn't sleep. Not with that adrenaline still coursing through me, and certainly not 10 feet from a creature that could rip my throat out faster than I could blink. But the chilling truth was, I felt muttered, giving him a name in my head. It fit. I reached for my canteen and took a careful sip of water. I looked at the wolf. He was breathing heavily, his flanks rising and falling rhythmically. Fighting a grizzly, even a short skirmish, takes serious energy. I carefully poured a little water onto a flat piece of rock near the edge of the firelight. You need this more than I do, buddy, the water. His focus remained outward. He was still standing guard. I spent the next hour just tending the tiny fire and watching him. My ankle was throbbing relentlessly, a constant reminder of how close I'd come to being stuck out there alone. If I had tried to push those last 2 miles, the bear would have found me helpless in the open. The wolf knew that. He had calculated the risk, thought back to the whole journey. The persistent tracking, the refusal of food, the sudden urgency when I fell. He hadn't been following me. He had been following the plan. Around midnight, the temperature must have hit 0. Even shielded by the granite, the cold was sinking into my bones. I huddled deeper into my thermal blanket. The wolf remained standing. He was a statue of vigilance. That time, but unmistakable. The bear was circling. He wasn't giving up. He was waiting for the immediate threat, the noise, the wolf, to lessen. The wolf let out that low, chesty growl again, a silent message passing between the 2 apex predators in the dark. Stay back. The growl seemed to settle the matter for a while. The thumping faded again. It was during the deep hour himself. The fire was dying down, just embers glowing now. The wolf shifted his weight slightly, and the low light caught the underside of his front right paw. I squinted, trying to see in the gloom. It wasn't an injury, not exactly, but something was off. As he settled down, I saw he was favoring that paw slightly, resting his weight more on the other 3. And when he moved that paw, slight irregularity in his movement. He wasn't injured now, but maybe he had been injured recently. Or maybe he was just tired. I also noticed his breathing had changed. It wasn't the heavy panting of exhaustion anymore. It was shallow, and every now and then he'd let out a small, quiet sigh, a sound of profound weariness, almost sadness. I felt a pang of pity, which was he had fought a bear for me, and he was exhausted. I decided to try talking to him again. I needed to know if I was missing something. "You're tired, aren't you, old man?" I murmured. "You've been running hard for days, maybe?" The wolf slowly turned his head. This time, he looked right at me, not with aggression, but with an intelligent, heavy gaze. He didn't speak, obviously, realized I was wrong about the plan. He hadn't been guiding me to the alcove to save my life. He had been guiding me to the alcove because he needed a defensible position, and he needed me, the man with the noisy gun and the air horn, to provide the secondary defense. But why? Why risk his life for me? I looked around the small cave again. It was dry, protected, and relatively warm. Hours approached, that coldest, darkest time right before the sun hits. The wolf finally did something that broke the tension entirely. He slowly, carefully lay down fully. He didn't turn his back on the entrance, but he relaxed his posture significantly. He was still alert, but he was resting. And when he lay down, the residual warmth from his body seemed to radiate out, easing the chill in the cave. Was 10 feet away, but the space felt suddenly smaller, more intimate. I closed my eyes for maybe 15 minutes, the first real rest I'd had all night, trusting that if the bear came back, the wolf would warn me. When I opened my eyes, the first hint of gray light was filtering through the entrance. The wind had died down almost completely. The forest was quiet. The wolf impatient. It was time to move. I struggled to sit up. My ankle was stiff and screaming in protest. I carefully unwrapped the thermal blanket. It was swollen, bruised, and definitely not weight-bearing. I pulled out my medical tape and an old bandana, fashioning a tight makeshift brace around the ankle and my boot. It was crude, but it would have to do. Fire. "All right, charcoal," I said, wincing as I pulled my pack onto my shoulders. "Let's go finish this." The wolf watched me, waiting until I was fully upright, leaning heavily on my rifle like a crutch. He didn't lead me out the way we came, back down the treacherous ledge. Instead, he led me directly up the steep incline, the route I had originally intended to take to the snowmobile camp. Agonizing. I was hopping, dragging my injured foot, but I kept the pace the wolf set, slow, steady, and relentless. We climbed for maybe 20 minutes, the light growing stronger with every step. I could finally see the plateau ahead. The snowmobile should be right over the crest, tucked behind the windbreak. Freedom, warmth, safety. But the wolf wasn't heading straight to the leveled out into a wide, open expanse of white. The wolf stopped dead. He stood maybe 50 yards from where my snowmobile was parked, still and statuesque against the rising sun. The sun hit his charcoal coat, making him look almost silver. He let out that low whimper again, the sound of profound distress I had heard when I first fell. Then he turned his head and looked directly at me. Final 30 yards, leaning hard on my rifle. When I finally reached his side, I looked at the snowmobile. It was exactly where I left it, covered in a light layer of powder. Nothing looked disturbed. "We made it, buddy," I whispered, relief washing over me. "I can get us out of here now." But the wolf didn't move toward the machine. He stepped a few feet just off the main path. I followed his gaze. There was a slight discoloration in the otherwise pristine white surface. It was a faint reddish-brown stain, mostly covered by the wind-driven powder, but visible enough in the harsh morning light. I hobbled over, my heart sinking. It looked like old blood. The wolf nudged the spot with his nose, then looked back at me, his eyes pleading. The shooting pain in my ankle and brushed the snow away with my gloved hand. It wasn't just a stain. Below the surface, the snow was packed down, disturbed. And there, frozen into the icy crust, were clear, unmistakable tracks. They weren't my tracks. They weren't the wolf's tracks. And they definitely weren't the bear's tracks. They were human tracks. Boot prints, large and heavy to read. And they were old. Maybe a week or two old. They led from the south side of the plateau, straight toward where my snowmobile was parked. I looked back at the wolf, confusion swirling into dread. "What is this?" He didn't answer with a nudge or a look. He answered with his body. He walked maybe 10 feet further, following the faint line of the old tracks, and then he began digging. Not aggressively, but rapidly and purposefully scraping away the powder with his massive paws. I watched, mesmerized as the wolf unearthed whatever was buried there. First, I saw the edge of a heavy canvas tarp, dirty and stiff with frost. Then, as the wolf pulled at the tarp with his teeth, he exposed what was beneath. It was a cache. Someone had buried supplies here. I knelt beside the exposed hole. Beneath the tarp was a large military-style metal box, sealed tight. Beside it were two heavy, frozen sacks of what looked like dried food and some coiled rope. But it was the third item that seized my attention, freezing the blood in my veins. Tucked between the metal box and the sacks was a rifle. A high-powered hunting rifle. Clearly not mine, just a random cache. This was someone's gear, left here deliberately, and, judging by the depth of the burial and the snow cover, they had left it a while ago. I reached out and touched the metal box. It was cold enough to burn. The wolf nudged the rifle with his nose, then looked up at me, his gaze intense. He wasn't asking me to take the rifle. He was showing me the evidence. South, stopped here, and then, judging by the absence of return tracks, whoever it was must have continued north, on foot, perhaps using the snowshoes. Someone was here, I whispered, the cold air stinging my lungs. A hunter, or someone else. The wolf let out another low, mournful sigh, then turned and started walking away from the cache, moving further onto the plateau toward the northern edge. Mind was racing now, piecing together the fragmented clues. The wolf hadn't been following me because I was Jake, the trapper. He had been following me because I was a human, and he needed a human to see this. I struggled to my feet, ignoring the pain. I had to see where he was going. We walked maybe 100 yards, the wolf setting the pace until we reached the very edge of a heavily wooded ravine. It was a dark, tangled mess of fallen timber and deep shadows, the kind of place you avoid, even in daylight. The wolf stopped at the lip of the ravine. He looked down into the shadows, then back at me. He waited. I limped up beside him, peering down into the gloomy depths. The air here was still and cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. And then I saw it. Broken spruce trees that had fallen years ago was a small, crudely built lean-to. It was barely visible, constructed from pine boughs and partially covered in snow. It looked desperate. The wolf nudged me toward the edge, then let out a soft, almost pleading whine. I understood then. The tracking, the guarding, the forced shelter, the fight with the bear, it wasn't about me. It was about who belonged to the tracks and the cache. I swallowed, the realization hitting me with a wave of sickening clarity. Whoever was down there was injured, trapped, or worse. And this magnificent animal, this creature of pure wilderness, had spent the last 24 hours desperately trying to bring help. "There's someone down there, isn't there, Charcoal?" I whispered. The wolf looked that same intense, anxious urgency. He took a single, slow step toward the treacherous slope. I gripped my rifle tighter. My heart was pounding, not from fear of the wolf, but from the sudden heavy burden of responsibility. I was here now. I was the help. I looked at the steep, icy slope. My ankle protested violently just at the thought of descending, but I had no choice. The wolf had done his part. I started the slow, painful descent into the ravine, sliding and catching myself with the rifle butt, while the wolf moved with silent grace ahead of me, finally leading me to the answer and whatever desperate human drama lay hidden in the deep shadows below. I knew that whatever I found down there would explain everything. The wolf's behavior, the strange journey, and the reason he had chosen me finally at the end of the line. The mystery was about to be solved. I started the slow, painful descent into the ravine, sliding and catching myself with the rifle butt, while the wolf moved with silent grace ahead of me, finally leading me to the answer and whatever desperate human drama lay hidden in the deep shadows below. My ankle was throbbing a steady, miserable beat, but the adrenaline urgency of the wolf overrode the pain. Charcoal didn't take the easiest path, he took the most direct. He was moving with purpose, picking his way down the icy, jumbled slope of broken timber. I had to use the rifle like a ski pole and a crutch all at once, scraping through the crusty snow and cursing under my breath every time I put too much weight on the bad leg. We were making a soft, almost imperceptible whine. It was that same sound of deep sorrow and anxiety. I paused, leaning against a thick, mossy snag. "I'm coming. I'm coming," I gasped, trying to keep my voice calm. "Is anyone there?" I called out, projecting my voice as best I could down the slope. "Hello, this is Jake. I have a wolf with me." The silence that followed was absolute. Ice somewhere nearby broke the quiet. I looked at Charcoal. He was looking intensely at the lean-to, which was now only about 30 feet away, tucked beneath the giant fallen spruce. He wasn't moving forward. He was waiting for me. "All right, buddy," I muttered, sliding the last few feet. "If you brought me all this way, I'm not stopping now." I moved toward the crude shelter, corpse, or maybe some injured animal the person was caring for. I pushed aside the flimsy curtain of pine boughs. The interior was small, dark, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and sickness. And there was a person inside. She was huddled deep in the back, wrapped in several layers of blankets and a faded blue parka. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the gloom, and drawn tight with pain, matted by sweat and the cold. She was conscious, her eyes wide open, staring at the sudden intrusion of light and my massive wolf companion. I dropped my rifle to the snow outside the entrance, a gesture of peace and urgency. I knelt beside her, ignoring the protest from my ankle. "Hey," I said softly, trying to sound competent and calm. "My name is Jake. I'm a trapper, the wolf. He led me here." Rattling cough escaped her lips. She pointed a thin, trembling hand toward her lower body, which was awkwardly positioned. I gently pulled back the blanket. Her right leg was swollen badly, angled wrong, and clearly broken just below the knee. It was tightly bound in makeshift splints made of scavenged wood and torn fabric. A terrible, painful job, but a job done out of necessity. "A break, here?" She finally managed to whisper, her voice thin as tissue paper. 5 days since the storm. 5 days in the cold. With a compound fracture, she was dangerously close to hypothermia and infection. I looked back at the entrance. Charcoal had followed me in. He didn't come to me. He walked directly to the woman. He gently nudged her face with his nose, whimpering softly, reached out a shaky hand and buried her fingers deep into his thick charcoal fur. A faint, weak smile touched her lips. "He found you," she whispered to the wolf, a sound of profound relief. "Oh, you crazy boy. You did it." I stared from the woman to the wolf. "You know this animal?" "He's my shadow," she whispered, taking a deep, ragged breath. "He stays near the cabin sometimes, his paw. I helped him, cleaned the wound, gave him food. He never left." I finally understood the slight irregularity in his movement, the old injury, and I understood why he knew the terrain so well and why he was so determined to save her. He wasn't just a wild wolf, he was a wolf with a debt, a loyalty forged in pain and rescue. "He left me a week ago," she continued, her eyes camera trap. "I knew I couldn't move. I knew I had to get help. I pointed him north, toward the main roads. I hoped he would find someone, anyone, and bring them back." I looked at Charcoal, who was now resting his massive head on her shoulder, completely calm, his mission finally accomplished. He hadn't been following me. He had been recruiting me. He saw another human, a potential strength, and my willingness to keep moving. He assessed me, determined I was capable, and then used my injury to force me into a safe, defensible position for the night, an action that saved both our lives from the bear. He had even used the cache and the tracks to give me the final, undeniable proof that someone was missing. He was the most intelligent, dedicated rescue dog I had ever encountered. "Charcoal," I said, a lump forming in my throat. You did more than just find someone. You found the only person for Miles who could have helped her. I immediately started working. First, stabilization. I used the emergency supplies from my pack, a better splint, antiseptic wipes, and pain medication, which I thankfully carried for my own occasional mishaps. She was dehydrated, so here, I told her, checking her pulse, which was weak and thready. The snowmobile is about half a mile up on the plateau. It's going to be rough, but we can do it. The cache, she murmured. I left a sled there, a small rescue sled. I couldn't carry it when I fell. I nodded. Of course, that's why he led me past the cache this morning. Not just to show me the tracks, but to remind me of to distract her from the pain as I worked on the splint. Amelia, she whispered. My name is Amelia. Okay, Amelia, stay with me. The next hour was the most grueling of my life. I had to leave Amelia briefly to fetch the sled and my rifle. Charcoal, who had been completely calm, became instantly alert when I moved to leave. He gave me a sharp, low growl, reminding me that the bear was her. I scrambled back up the slope, using the rifle and the adrenaline of the discovery to propel me. I found the cache, pulled out the lightweight rescue sled, a simple plastic shell designed for hauling gear or injured people, and strapped it to my pack. I grabbed the rifle and hurried back down. When I returned, Charcoal was sitting right in front of Amelia, facing the entrance, difficult, both for her and for me, trying to maintain balance on my bad ankle. But we managed. Charcoal watched every move, occasionally giving a gentle nudge to the sled to help position it. The ascent was slow-motion agony. I pulled the sled, leaning into the harness, dragging Amelia up the slope, while using my rifle as a third point of contact. Charcoal walked right beside the sled, her side. He was her escort, her protector, and her nurse. When we finally crested the plateau and reached the snowmobile, the sun was fully up, washing the high country in blinding white light. I was shaking from exertion and cold. I secured Amelia on the seat of the snowmobile, positioning her carefully so she could lean against the pack and minimize movement in her leg. Charcoal. He stood beside the machine, looking at Amelia, then at me. His duty was done. I need to get her to a hospital, Charcoal, I said, kneeling down, ignoring the throbbing pain. I have to leave now. I didn't expect him to follow the snowmobile. Wolves don't chase machines. I started the engine. It roared to life, a loud, comforting sound of civilization and rescue. Thank you, Jake. He chose well. I nodded, touched by the depth of their understanding. Then I looked back at Charcoal. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't whine or howl. He just sat down in the snow, right next to the empty rescue sled, and watched us. He looked profoundly tired, but satisfied. As I pulled away, slowly at first, then picking up speed across the open plateau, sitting alone, a massive, lonely king of the mountain, framed against the bright morning sun. I drove for 3 straight hours until I hit the nearest logging outpost where I knew I could raise a rescue helicopter. Amelia was airlifted out that afternoon, and she survived. She was tough, tougher than the mountains themselves. I never saw Charcoal again. But that story, that 7-mile journey, changed everything for me. It broke down every hard line I had drawn between the wild world and the human world. I went back up to the plateau a few weeks later, after the snows had deepened, to check on the cache and collect my gear. The cache was untouched. The small alcove cave was empty. But when I reached the edge of the plateau, overlooking the ravine where I found Amelia, silence. And there, right on the crest of the ridge, perfectly preserved in the fresh powder, was a single, massive wolf track. It was heading south, away from civilization, back into the deepest part of the high country. I knelt down and looked closely. Just next to the massive print, there was a faint, shallow drag mark, a subtle sign of a slight limp, likely the lingering effect of that old snare injury. That the wilderness wasn't just a place of cold, hard survival. It was a place of deep, complex loyalty. A place where an animal could recognize a kindness, repay a debt, and undertake a desperate, impossible mission to save the one person who had saved him. I went back to my trapping lines, but I never looked at the forest the same way. I was just Jake, the trapper. But now, with the pines, I listen a little closer, knowing that sometimes the true path to safety is not the one you choose, but the one chosen for you by a massive, silent shadow with eyes the color of